and sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen,
An unmarked royal courier vehicle departed from the private stables of Sandringham House under total radio silence. King Charles has signed a shocking, fast-tracked emergency order that completely rewrites the palace balance of power. Bypassing traditional Privy Council debate, the sovereign granted Catherine, the Princess of Wales, exclusive legal control over the crown jewels. This historic mandate has completely revoked Queen Camilla's administrative access keys to the historic family vaults. Catherine now stands as the absolute single-handed gatekeeper of the monarchy's material legacy, locking out her critics completely. The Midnight Warrant. An unmarked royal courier vehicle departed from the private stables of Sandringham House under total radio silence at precisely midnight. The sleek black vehicle slipped through the rear security gates of the Norfolk estate, completely bypassing the main thoroughfares where automotive tracking cameras or independent journalists might be stationed. Inside the climate-controlled cargo section sat a reinforced leather dispatch box carrying a single, high-priority document that bore the fresh fountain pen signature of King Charles. This was not a routine administrative brief, a standard royal appointment, or a document requiring a lengthy debate before the Privy Council. It was a shocking, fast-tracked emergency executive warrant that effectively fundamentally rewrote the internal power dynamics of the British monarchy by granting Catherine, the Princess of Wales, exclusive legal control over the historic crown jewel collection. The rapid, highly secretive execution of this sovereign mandate represents an unprecedented consolidation of material power within the direct line of succession. Historically, the distribution, maintenance, and public allocation of the Crown's vast treasure vaults fell under the joint administration of the Lord Chamberlain's office and the reigning monarch's spouse. For several generations, the Queen Consort traditionally enjoyed wide, practically unchecked discretionary authority over which tiaras, necklaces, and brooches were pulled from the vaults for high-profile state banquets and international tours. By using his absolute sovereign prerogative to strip those traditional privileges away and hand them solely to his daughter-in-law, Charles was drawing an unyielding line in the sand, establishing a modern administrative model that completely isolates peripheral branches of the household. The immediate question that paralyzed the senior courtiers who managed the palace logistics was the specific high-stakes catalyst that had forced the king to take such a dramatic step under the cover of darkness. Charles had been spending the week focusing heavily on his private medical treatments, with his staff strictly managing his daily calendar to avoid any unnecessary institutional stress or administrative confrontation. Yet, his legal advisors had spent the previous 48 hours working alongside independent constitutional experts to finalize the exact phrasing of the letter's patent. The sheer urgency of the Midnight Warrant proved that a significant, behind-the-scenes threat to the integrity of the collection had been detected by the Palace Intelligence Network, requiring an immediate, legally binding counterstrike before the information could reach the public domain. The answer to this initial structural mystery points directly to a quiet, highly aggressive attempt by outside financial teams to initiate an independent audit of the royal family's private assets. A veteran archivist working within the Central Crown estate databases had flagged an unusual series of formal discovery requests originating from corporate law firms based in the United States. These legal researchers, who were representing estranged family members in ongoing civil litigation, were attempting to use international discovery laws to compile a complete, monetized inventory of all historical artifacts currently held within the private royal vaults. They hoped to prove that a significant portion of the collection was technically classified as personal, divisible family property rather than protected, inalienable assets of the state. If these corporate attorneys successfully forced an open court disclosure, the financial vulnerability of the monarchy would be completely exposed to global public scrutiny, potentially triggering an invasive parliamentary investigation into the family's untaxed historical wealth. King Charles realized that his current health battles left his administration poorly equipped to fight a protracted, document-heavy legal battle across multiple international jurisdictions. He needed an immediate constitutional shield that would permanently remove the collection from the reach of foreign civil courts and commercial litigation. By executing the emergency letters patent, the king achieved exactly that. utilizing a highly specialized 20th century royal prerogative to place the entire material legacy of the crown under a unique, protected administrative structure that sits entirely outside the jurisdiction of standard civil discovery. The choice of Catherine as the absolute single-handed gatekeeper of this newly isolated treasury was a calculated masterstroke of institutional survival. The Princess of Wales has spent over a decade building a reputation for absolute loyalty, dignity, and flawless adherence to traditional palace protocols. By placing the keys to the vaults directly into her hands, the king was signaling to the international financial markets and the political committees in London that the material foundation of the monarchy was being securely anchored to the future of the direct bloodline. The move effectively transforms Catherine from a ceremonial fashion icon into the ultimate unassailable manager of the institution's portable wealth, ensuring that no peripheral family member or incoming spouse can ever dilute or manipulate the historic collection for private philanthropic projects. With that specific legal mystery thoroughly resolved by the archival paper trail, a far more dangerous institutional crisis immediately opened up within the private corridors of Clarence House. The emergency warrant did not just secure the outer borders of the Treasury against foreign lawyers. It explicitly revoked the administrative access keys historically held by Queen Camilla's personal styling team. The new regulations dictated that every single request for an item to be removed from the secure vault rooms must be accompanied by a digital authorization, token signed personally by the Princess of Wales at Adelaide Cottage. The traditional consensus model that had governed the family's wardrobe choices for decades was entirely dead, replaced by a strict, centralized command structure that left the queen consort completely dependent on her daughter-in-law's explicit approval. As the courier vehicle finally arrived at the secure rear courtyard of the Duchy of Lancaster headquarters in central London to officially log the signed letters patent, the scale of the impending family fallout became completely undeniable. The king's shocking signature had successfully constructed an impenetrable bureaucratic wall around the crown jewels, shifting the balance of power within the palace walls before the upper tier of the household staff could even draft a response to the morning's adjustments. The physical documents were quickly routed down to the subterranean legal vaults, locked away behind 3 layers of reinforced steel security doors under a high-grade digital encryption protocol. The mandate was officially active. The lines had been firmly drawn in black ink on historic parchment, and the future Queen of England stood established as the sole, absolute guardian of the monarchy's ultimate treasures. Locking out. Clarence House. The heavy steel-reinforced security doors of the subterranean jewel chamber beneath Buckingham Palace remained resolutely immobile at exactly 8 o'clock the following morning. A senior wardrobe dresser attached to Queen Camilla's personal styling team stepped forward to press her master biometric identity card against the wall-mounted electronic scanner. Instead of the familiar green clearance light, the digital screen flashed a bright crimson warning code accompanied by an automated, low-volume audio message stating that her administrative access privileges had been permanently revoked by executive order. Within 5 minutes, 2 armed officers from the Royalton Specialist Protection Command stepped out of the adjacent guard room, holding a printed copy of the newly signed sovereign letters patent. The sudden, clinical lockout at the palace gates created an immediate, high-stakes institutional crisis that quickly rippled through the administrative offices of Clarence House. Camilla's personal private secretary arrived at the checkpoint moments later, demanding a face-to-face explanation from the master of the household. The security detail remained completely unmoved, explaining that their direct, unnegotiable instructions came straight from the newly established Jewel Management Committee operating under the authority of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The traditional master keys that had allowed the Queen Consort staff to routinely extract historic tiaras, diamond necklaces, and royal brooches for styling sessions had been wiped from the central security mainframe under the cover of night. This dramatic shift in vault logistics highlights the cold, corporate reality that has quietly replaced the old consensus model of palace management. For generations, the distribution of the crown's portable wealth was handled through a polite system of informal requests and verbal agreements between the sovereign's spouse and the senior archivists of the Royal Collection Trust. While the reigning monarch always held the ultimate theoretical authority over the collection, the daily operational control was traditionally left to the queen consort to manage her extensive state wardrobe. By completely revoking those digital access privileges and installing Catherine as the absolute single-handed gatekeeper, the emergency order effectively dismantled the traditional hierarchy of the court, leaving Camilla entirely dependent on her daughter-in-law's written consent. The immediate mystery that consumed the inner circle of the Queen's advisors was whether Prince William had secretly engineered this sweeping administrative coup to accelerate his own branch's control over the family's assets. Rumors had been circulating through the corridors of Kensington Palace that the Prince of Wales had grown increasingly concerned about the long-term preservation of the historic collections, particularly after a series of high-profile property disputes involving the Wessex line. The styling team desperately tried to initiate a direct telephone call to the King's personal study at Sandringham House, hoping to secure an immediate emergency override from the sovereign himself. The mystery of William's involvement was swiftly resolved when the chief archivist delivered a secure digital copy of the Master Inventory Registry to the Clarence House Legal Department. The metadata logs embedded within the digital file revealed that the strict, restrictive clauses of the letter's patent had been co-drafted by William and the King's senior personal solicitor during a quiet, unannounced weekend summit at Windsor Castle. The initiative had not been a rash, impulsive decision by an isolated monarch. It was a deeply calculated, preemptive legal maneuver designed by the heir to the throne to permanently secure the material foundation of the crown before the next major transition of power could begin. The underlying tension inside the private apartments reached an absolute breaking point as the true scale of the new restrictions became entirely apparent to Camilla's styling consultants. The emergency mandate did not merely require Catherine's team to be notified of any jewelry extractions. It explicitly transferred the legal ownership of the specialized transport cases and the high-security courier logs directly to the office of the Princess of Wales at Adelaide Cottage. This meant that even if the Queen Consort wished to wear a relatively minor, sentimental piece of jewelry that had belonged to the late Queen Mother, her staff would have to submit a formal, line-by-line administrative petition detailing the exact duration of the public display, the precise security profile of the venue, and the exact methods of physical storage during the event. Faced with this complete administrative wall, Camilla's advisors realized that their entire public relations strategy for the upcoming autumn state banquet season was facing a massive, unprecedented crisis. A high-profile diplomatic visit from a major European head of state was scheduled to take place at the palace in less than 3 weeks, an event where the international media would be focusing heavily on the traditional display of historic state jewelry. The sudden lockout meant that the Queen Consort's team could no longer guarantee the availability of the specific high-status tiaras that had been carefully selected months in advance to complement her formal evening gowns. The entire wardrobe planning process had been thrown into a state of total paralysis, forcing the staff to confront a cold reality where their executive influence had been thoroughly neutralized. The resolution to this immediate logistical puzzle came through a sharp, highly visible modification to the official state diary logs. Rather than engaging in a public, damaging bureaucratic battle with the Prince of Wales's legal team, Camilla quietly ordered her senior dresser to cancel all pending jewelry extraction requests and focus exclusively on her personal, private collection of modern gems that sat entirely outside the jurisdiction of the Crown Vaults. She chose to completely separate her public appearance wardrobe from the contested historical collection, effectively accepting the boundary line that Catherine had drawn. It was a pragmatic, silent retreat designed to preserve the public peace of the reign, but it left her inner circle completely isolated from the material legacy of the monarchy. Meanwhile, Catherine's team at Adelaide Cottage spent the afternoon initializing a brand new, highly restricted digital database designed to track every single square inch of the historic collection in real time. The young princess had officially transitioned from a ceremonial figure into the absolute, ultimate manager of the crown's portable wealth, implementing a strict modern tracking system that required dual-factor biometric authentication from her personal security detail before a single vault door could be unlocked. The corporate defense of the estate was officially complete, leaving the older generation of administrators entirely obsolete as the new master of the palace treasury, took command of the family's future with an iron will and absolute legal precision. As the final security updates were locked into the palace mainframe, the hallway outside the subterranean jewel chamber returned to its usual, heavily guarded stillness. The armed officers remained stationed at the reinforced doors, their clipboards containing the updated clearance lists that bore only one master signature. The shocking signature of King Charles had successfully rewritten the balance of power within the palace walls, leaving his wife's advisors with entirely empty hands and permanently anchoring the material foundation of the monarchy to the direct line of succession for generations to come. The constitutional shield. The automated electronic notification server inside the Parliamentary Oversight Committee offices in Westminster hummed to life at exactly 9:30 in the morning. A senior civil servant working within the Public Accounts Registry picked up a freshly printed data log sheet that detailed an unprecedented structural shift in the Crown's central asset registries. The document did not stem from a routine legislative amendment or a public treasury consultation. It was the digital verification code of the emergency order signed at Sandringham House. By executing this specific warrant, King Charles had successfully utilized an ancient, deeply complex layer of the royal prerogative to build an absolute legal shield around the monarchy's most valuable historical artifacts, placing them entirely out of reach from both parliamentary interference and peripheral family disputes. The rapid silent activation of this constitutional shield highlights the hidden legal mechanisms that protect the ultimate survival of the British monarchy. To the general public, the Crown Jewel Collection is viewed primarily as a national treasure, a timeless display of sovereign prestige that sits securely within the public exhibition cases of the Tower of London. Behind the scenes, however, the legal status of these historic items is governed by a patchwork of ancient charters, codified conventions, and 20th century property statutes. When a reigning monarch signs an emergency executive letters patent to modify the custody chain of these assets, they are not simply changing a palace management rule. They are actively altering the constitutional fabric of the state to insulate the Crown's private core from external vulnerability. The specific tension inside the parliamentary oversight offices spiked because the King's legal team had deliberately bypassed the standard administrative review tracks usually managed by the Privy Council. Under modern governance models established following the civil list reforms of the late 20th century, any major restructuring of public or semi-public Crown properties is typically subjected to a lengthy process of cross-departmental vetting to ensure transparency and accountability. By utilizing a highly specialized, fast-track sovereign warrant, the King effectively short-circuited the traditional bureaucratic oversight channels. He presented the senior ministers with a completed constitutional reality before they could even draft a preliminary inquiry regarding the long-term fiscal impact of the transfer. The immediate mystery that consumed the constitutional experts advising the government was the exact legislative framework Charles had unearthed to justify such a sweeping consolidation of material power. The King's personal medical battles had dominated the international headlines for months, leading many political commentators to assume that his administration was entirely focused on routine state duties and quiet recovery. Why then would his legal team spend weeks digging through the historic archives to locate a highly restrictive, forgotten clause within an old Crown defense statute? The explanation for this massive constitutional riddle involved a quiet, highly sensitive legal assessment completed by independent international property lawyers during the winter of 2025. The legal team discovered that because several peripheral branches of the family had established complex corporate entities and charitable trusts across multiple overseas jurisdictions, the traditional, unrecorded agreements that had historically protected the Crown Jewel Collection were becoming dangerously vulnerable to foreign legal discovery actions. If a disgruntled relative or an international corporate adversary initiated a civil lawsuit in a foreign court, they could potentially petition for an official, monetized audit of the family's private collections to seek financial compensation. To prevent this nightmare scenario from triggering a catastrophic institutional crisis, the King's senior solicitors used the emergency order to explicitly anchor the entire historic jewelry collection to the Crown Revenues Act of 1952. This specific legislative maneuver permanently redefined the legal status of the artifacts, transforming them from divisible personal family property into inalienable, non-transferable fixtures of the sovereign estate itself. This ancient classification completely removes the collection from the jurisdiction of standard civil courts, domestic probate reviews, and foreign legal discovery, ensuring that the income streams and material assets remain permanently shielded behind an absolute wall of state protection. With the legal nature of the constitutional shield thoroughly unpacked and resolved by the archival paper trail, a far more delicate mystery opened up within the hallways of Buckingham Palace regarding the active role Prince William had played in coordinating the sudden administrative lockdown. Senior courtiers who had served the family for decades noted that the specific phrasing of the new letters patent bore the distinct, uncompromising hallmark of the Prince of Wales's modern corporate philosophy. William had long advocated for a ruthless streamlining of the royal family's asset portfolio, frequently arguing that the long-term survival of the institution depended on focusing all available resources and security protocols exclusively on the direct, working line of succession. The resolution to this internal mystery came to light through a series of encrypted digital memos discovered within the central registry files of the Duchy of Lancaster office. The documentation proved that William had personally commissioned the independent legal audit nearly 8 months prior, quietly working alongside the King's principal private secretary to construct the defensive framework, while the rest of the household was entirely focused on the public relations management of the summer state visits. The future king had successfully identified the underlying legal vulnerabilities in the Crown's property tracking systems, presented his father with an airtight plan for institutional defense, and secured the sovereign's shocking signature to enforce the changes before any internal palace resistance could materialize. The immediate consequence of this constitutional lockdown was a total paralysis of the traditional influence networks that had historically operated within the palace walls. The permanent secretaries of the civil service were forced to immediately update their internal asset ledgers, officially registering Catherine, the Princess of Wales, as the sole, absolute administrator of the newly ring-fenced Treasury subsidiary. This meant that the central government administrators could no longer route property inquiries or wardrobe logistics through the general household committees. They had to submit every single piece of administrative paperwork directly to the private office at Adelaide Cottage, confirming her status as the ultimate guardian of the monarchy's material legacy. The section concludes by looking directly at the permanent, unyielding boundary that this constitutional shield has established for the future of the modern reign. By using the absolute weight of the royal prerogative to lock down the family's core wealth, Charles and William had completed a sweeping institutional transformation that completely alters how the court functions behind closed doors. The traditional consensus model was gone forever, replaced by a fast-paced, highly corporate management style that relies on strict legal codes and airtight administrative barriers rather than informal family agreements. The ironclad vaults beneath the palace were secure, the legal precedents were permanently recorded in the master ledger books, and the direct line of succession stood completely insulated from the swirling storms of external controversy and domestic division. Catherine's silent command. A secure digital tablet illuminated the private workspace inside Adelaide Cottage at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, initialized the freshly encrypted master inventory database under her personal, high-grade biometric signature. This morning, she was not preparing for a ceremonial public reception or reviewing a list of charitable patronages. Instead, she was executing her first official day of active operational duty as the sole, absolute guardian of the crown jewel collection. The transition looked incredibly quiet from the outside, but it represented a massive, unprecedented shift in how the material assets of the British monarchy would be managed moving forward. The initialization of this new tracking platform highlights the clean, corporate management philosophy that the Princess of Wales has brought to the center of palace logistics. For decades, the tracking of the royal jewelry vaults relied on traditional, handwritten paper ledgers and periodic physical audits managed by the older generation of curators. This archaic system left the collection dangerously vulnerable to administrative oversights and slow retrieval and packaging during busy state banquet seasons. Catherine's first executive order eliminated the old manual protocols, replacing them with a highly sophisticated, real-time tracking network that logs the exact temperature, physical orientation, and cryptographic access history of every single historic piece in the collection. The tension across the central registry departments deepened as the first wave of inventory data was processed through the secure terminal at Adelaide Cottage. Catherine's administrative assistants began routing formal instruction slips down to the subterranean vault rooms beneath Buckingham Palace. These documents required the senior archivists to immediately apply unique, microscopic digital tracking markers to the reverse side of every single historic tiara, necklace, and royal brooch. This modern tracking system meant that if an item was moved even an inch from its designated storage container without explicit pre-authorized double-factor authentication from Catherine's digital token, an automatic high-priority alarm would immediately trigger across the entire network. This sudden administrative lockdown introduced an explosive, multi-layered mystery into the inner circles of the household staff. The public had long been accustomed to viewing the Princess of Wales as a purely ceremonial figure, a dedicated family woman who stepped into the media spotlight only when required by official state scheduling. Why then would she suddenly take on the intense, dry administrative responsibilities of a corporate chief executive officer, spending hours cross-referencing property codes and security profiles? The explanation for this dramatic strategic shift involves a highly sensitive, long-term asset protection policy, co-drafted during a quiet, unannounced weekend summit at Windsor Castle. Catherine and Prince William had spent months analyzing the shifting international legal landscape alongside the King's senior personal solicitors. They realized that to guarantee the absolute financial security of their children's future inheritance, they could no longer rely on the informal family agreements that had governed previous generations. They needed a centralized, document-heavy command structure that completely decoupled the core family treasures from the general palace bureaucracy, ensuring that only the direct line of succession could dictate the terms of public display. The realization that Catherine was actively running the collection with such absolute precision completely paralyzed any remaining plans for a palace counter-strike by outside court factions. Her advisors had successfully established a legal and digital framework that was entirely impenetrable, leaving her critics completely isolated from the material foundation of the crown's portable wealth. Every single request for an item to be removed from the secure vault rooms, whether for a routine cleaning session or a high-profile museum exhibition, now required a line-by-line administrative justification submitted directly to the private office at Adelaide Cottage. The old ways of doing business were entirely dead, replaced by a fast-paced, highly clinical management style that left no room for internal political maneuvering. With the master inventory registry successfully initialized and the physical security protocols actively deployed across the estate, a far more dangerous question immediately opened up for the palace's legal counsels. The corporate attorneys working alongside the Duchy of Lancaster office discovered a hidden, highly restrictive clause that the legal teams had inserted into the final drafts of the emergency order. This specific clause explicitly stated that the newly ring-fenced jewelry collection was permanently bound to a 20th century agricultural defense statute, a technical maneuver that completely shields the assets from any future civil court challenges or foreign discovery actions originating from overseas relatives. This legal barrier was a calculated preemptive strike against the ongoing civil litigation currently raging across the Atlantic. By anchoring the collection to a historical state defense act, the lawyers ensured that no foreign judge or international corporate adversary could ever petition for an official audit of the family's private collections. The crown jewels were legally classified as non-transferable fixtures of the sovereign estate, effectively rendering any external censorship or legal discovery attempts entirely obsolete before they could even reach the desk of the Home Secretary. As the morning session drew to a close, Catherine signed off from the secure database terminal, leaving her communication managers to monitor the automated system logs. She had completed a sweeping institutional transformation that permanently redefined her position within the royal hierarchy, stepping into a role of profound, quiet authority that would shape the trajectory of her upcoming reign. The ironclad vaults beneath the palace were secure, The digital tracking networks were active, and the Princess of Wales stood established as the ultimate, unassailable guardian of the monarchy's material legacy, leaving her critics entirely stranded on the paper mills of the old court. The diplomatic realignment. A series of highly confidential briefing notes arrived on the desks of senior ambassadors at foreign embassies across London at precisely 9 o'clock the following morning. The documents did not contain traditional diplomatic updates regarding trade policies, immigration frameworks, or international treaties. Instead, they detailed a sharp, unexpected structural shift in the ceremonial logistics for the upcoming winter state banquet season. The foreign legations were quietly informed that all traditional requests for the loan or public display of specific historical artifacts from the crown jewel collection would now be handled through a completely updated administrative protocol, routed entirely away from the central household committees and managed exclusively by the private office of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, at Adelaide Cottage. The rapid dissemination of these diplomatic updates highlights how the distribution of historic tiaras, state necklaces, and royal brooches has been transformed into a powerful tool of domestic and international diplomacy. To the public, the glittering jewels displayed at a formal white-tie dinner are viewed primarily as beautiful historical decorations, serving as a glamorous backdrop for high-profile political speeches and international handshakes. Behind the scenes, however, the choice of which senior royal woman wears which specific piece carries an immense amount of political weight, signaling the precise status, influence, and structural alignment of individual family members within the current reign. By establishing herself as the sole, absolute distributor of these high-status treasures, Catherine was firmly drawing a line, ensuring that only the direct, loyal working lines of the bloodline would be permitted to display the crown's historic identity on the global stage. The specific tension inside the diplomatic community spiked because the new guidelines completely upended months of careful wardrobe and scheduling coordination for several upcoming state visits. Traditionally, foreign ambassadors would work alongside Queen Camilla's personal styling team to ensure that the jewelry worn by the host family complemented the specific cultural traditions, national colors, and heraldic symbols of the visiting head of state. This delicate process required a high degree of informal flexibility and collaborative planning across the different palace departments. The sudden implementation of the new mandate completely paralyzed these established communication channels, forcing the foreign attachés to scrap their existing logistical charts and submit formal, line-by-line administrative petitions directly to Catherine's legal team for review. The immediate mystery that consumed the political attachés was how the Queen Consort would adapt her public presentation strategy to accommodate this total loss of discretionary authority over the crown vaults. Camilla had spent years carefully managing her public profile, relying heavily on a selection of high-profile, historic pieces that had belonged to the late Queen Mother to establish her visual authority as the king's wife during major international summits. If she suddenly appeared at a major state banquet wearing significantly less historic or less prestigious jewelry, the international media would instantly seize on the visual contrast, framing the shift as a public confirmation of a deep, irreversible internal division within the core leadership team. The resolution to this delicate public relations mystery came to light through a swift, highly deliberate modification to the official state diary logs. Rather than engaging in a public, damaging bureaucratic battle with the office of the Prince of Wales, Camilla quietly ordered her senior dressers to completely withdraw all pending jewelry extraction requests from the central database. She chose to realign her public wardrobe strategy entirely, focusing her public appearances on her own personal, private collection of modern gems and custom-made pieces that sat completely outside the jurisdiction of the crown vaults. This strategic separation effectively neutralized the potential for a public media circus, allowing her to maintain her state duties with absolute dignity while fully respecting the strict boundary line that Catherine had erected. The long-term impact of this diplomatic realignment extended far beyond the immediate logistics of the autumn wardrobe choices. By establishing an airtight, document-heavy command structure over the collection, Catherine had successfully created a permanent institutional barrier that completely isolates peripheral branches of the family and overseas relatives from the material foundation of the crown's portable wealth. The international media, finding themselves completely unable to locate any cracks or vulnerabilities in the newly deployed digital tracking systems, began to focus their commentary on the rising authority of the Princess of Wales, framing her as a modern, hyper-vigilant chief executive officer who was actively running the business operations of the family with absolute precision. The corporate defense of the estate was officially complete, leaving the older generation of court advisors entirely obsolete as the new master of the palace treasury executed her long-term strategy for risk containment. The traditional consensus model that had governed the family's assets for generations was gone forever, replaced by a fast-paced, highly clinical management style that relies strictly on legal codes, cryptographic security protocols, and unyielding statutory definitions. The final registration stamps from the High Court had successfully woven the emergency order into the permanent constitutional fabric of the realm, ensuring that the ironclad vaults beneath the palace would remain securely anchored to the future of the direct line of succession, completely insulated from the swirling storms of external controversy and domestic division for generations to come. The ironclad vaults, the final registration stamps from the High Court, confirmed that the emergency order had been woven directly into the permanent constitutional fabric of the realm by Friday afternoon. The rapid, quiet processing of the legal deeds officially closed the book on the most significant redistribution of material power inside the palace walls since the middle of the last century. King Charles's shocking signature had successfully constructed an impenetrable, document-backed barrier around the monarchy's most valuable historical assets, permanently transforming the operational rules of the court. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood established as the ultimate, unassailable guardian of the crown jewels, leaving her critics completely isolated from the material foundation of the future reign. The physical reality of this new power dynamic was permanently marked by the quiet closing of the heavy steel vault doors beneath Buckingham Palace. The security detail stationed at the subterranean entrance operated under a single, unnegotiable set of biometric clearance files that bore only one master authorization token. Queen Camilla's personal styling advisors had officially withdrawn all pending property claims, completely adapting their wardrobe strategy to focus exclusively on independent, private collections that sat entirely outside the jurisdiction of the Crown Estate. The lines had been drawn in black ink on historic parchment, and the traditional consensus model that had governed the family's wealth for generations was gone forever. The ultimate significance of this high-stakes administrative coup extended far beyond a simple domestic property dispute over historic tiaras and state necklaces. By anchoring the collection to a 20th century Crown Defense statute, the legal teams had successfully insulated the family's core assets from any future civil court challenges or invasive discovery actions originating from overseas relatives. The crown jewels were legally classified as non-transferable, inalienable fixtures of the sovereign estate itself, rendering any external censorship or international financial audits entirely obsolete before they could even reach the desk of the Home Secretary. As the autumn mist settled over the quiet grounds of Windsor Great Park, the immediate bureaucratic panic finally began to transition into a new, highly stable institutional reality. Catherine had completed a sweeping transformation that permanently redefines her position within the royal hierarchy, stepping into a role of profound, quiet authority that will shape the trajectory of her upcoming reign. The ironclad vaults beneath the palace were secure, the digital tracking networks were active, and the Princess of Wales stood fully prepared to run the business operations of the family firm with an iron will.